Psalm 24, verses 1 through 10, and then we will look a little bit deeper into it. So this is the word of the Lord. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein. For he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false, and does not swear deceitfully, he will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of God, of the God of Jacob. Selah. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Selah. Father, in your words there is power, Lord. There is might to change us, to move us. And, oh God, I pray that you would use your word here today, again, to speak into our hearts, to cleanse where we need cleansing, to teach where we need teaching, to comfort, to challenge. Lord, whatever your purpose, we make ourselves available to you now, and we thank you in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Please be seated. So I think I mentioned, it was probably back in Hebrews. I didn't look back specifically, but I think it was like Hebrews 10, 11, somewhere around there, where I said if the world keeps going the way it's going and the government starts, confiscating Bibles and biblical Christian literature and doing that, and if I could save one page from the Bible, yes, there's that one in Hebrews, but this would be a close second, Psalm 24. And on my page, you got Psalm 23, 24, and almost all of 25 in my Bible. So that'd be a fantastic, and parts of 22, that'd be a fantastic page to keep. Because in this Psalm 24, we learn and we see and we're confronted by, we are challenged to consider many things. We come to see and know God and his character. We come to see a lot about ourselves. We see, if not Jesus himself, we see our need for Jesus. We see the promise of a future kingdom. And maybe a few other things. So we're going to look at this again. When a preacher writes a sermon or plans out a sermon, there are usually many different ways to deliver it, to cut it up. And one way I was thinking of was verse 1 and 2 is, well, I'm going to give a little perspective, a little background first. So the first one is a perspective that's over the whole thing, especially about David, who wrote the psalm. And then verses 1 and 2 is kind of like the proclamation. Verses 3 and 4 are the prerequisites. 5 and 6, or 5 and 6 kind of, or 3, 4, and 5 are the prerequisites. 6 kind of stands alone. 7 through 10 is a presentation of the king. So I may not refer to those points throughout the sermon, but that's one way we can kind of look at it. I'm just kind of going to go through it. I'm not going to, go point to point to point, but I am going to go through it. But I want to share first about what we can learn from this psalm about sort of about David, the author, the writer of this psalm, but also about ourselves. Because David was the king, which sounds pretty impressive to us, but he was a king of Israel. And Israel at the time was not really a notable kingdom to be king over. You had many bigger, greater kingdoms that had many greater accomplishments. You had the Babylonian Empire, right? Babylonia, beautiful buildings and infrastructure and what they call it, like hanging gardens. And you walk into the Babylonian region, the city, and it's just glorious. It's beautiful. Wealth, tremendous wealth. You have Egypt, the Egyptian empire, kingdom, and the height of knowledge and education and wealth as well. You have the Assyrian Empire, mighty in power. You know, the kings would just ravage through areas and take over and completely obliterate cities and people groups. And then you have little Israel, not really known for much as far as I'm aware. And you have this little guy who's was a sheep, tended sheep, and God looked all over the world, all over the earth, and he centered on this little young man and boy in Israel, and he pointed his finger, and it's like, you are going to be my king. And so David rises up in obedience, and Lord grows him up to be the king. And he's done many things. We looked a lot about that when we were in 1 Samuel, and he's done many things. And now this psalm is one of many where we see kind of how David is like us, how he is similar to us, or we to him. If you look at Psalm, you don't have to look at it, but Psalm 21 is kind of the king rejoices, it says. The king rejoices in the Lord's strength. Psalm 22, it's like the negative image. It's like, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? From the words of my groaning, you just see that pain that David is suffering for some reason. And then Psalm 23 is somewhat neutral, right? And then 24 is a positive psalm. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and all who dwell. It's kind of a positive one. And then, others, 10, 13, 22, 15 are all sort of sad, struggling psalms. And then others, like 120 through 133, the Psalms of Ascent, the Songs of Ascent, are kind of like celebratory, and we see David going through all these ups and downs in his life just through reading the Psalms. You can certainly read that if you read, the passages about David in 1 and 2 Samuel, but even through reading those pieces, those poems, songs that he wrote, we kind of see that he's a lot like us. Because I don't know about you, but in any given week, I have ups and downs. Any given day. I mean, sometimes, how sometimes you just wake up and you just feel like, I'm just going to be in a bad mood all day. You don't see that. It doesn't happen on Sunday. But some of you may not like me too much on some days of the week. Right, Mish? Good answer. Good answer. She didn't jump to say right. But our lives are pretty much characterized by that, isn't it? How many of us, and maybe some of you are, God bless you, literally, if that's the case, but how many of us are just steady people? Steady people. We're either happy or not sad, maybe neutral, always just tackling life and go. I don't think many of us are like that. So we see David This one psalm we're now is sort of on the peak, maybe. But, if you keep reading the Psalms, you'll see eventually he's going to come down and say, my enemies are pursuing me. But the Psalms that we see and the emotions, the qualities that we see in David throughout the Psalms, I listed just a few of them. It's like there's guilt, there's sorrow, there's fear, there's celebration, there's power, there's weakness, there's joy, there's questioning, there's depression, there's evidence of hope in the future, there's trust, there's the result of sins. All these things come out in David's writings. And not all the Psalms come from David, but just in David's writings, we see all these things coming out. And aren't those all the emotions and ups and downs that we go through in life? So it would behoove you to spend some time in the Psalms. I went to a preacher's conference once. Steve Lawson, Steve Lawson, you might have heard his name. He was speaking up in around Nashua, New Hampshire, Nashua, and he said, if you haven't ever preached the Psalms, he said, do it. He said, it'll be a huge blessing for you and your congregation. So I don't know if we'll ever get that. We're going to be starting Acts either next week or the week after, and that'll be I think a pretty interesting sermon series as well. But after that, maybe we will do Psalms. And so if you stick around another 5 to 10 years, you may hear Psalm 24 again. But we're going to look at this and take it apart a little bit. That was just a pretty long introduction or prelude. But David starts with the earth is the Lord's. So 5 words which are very noteworthy. The earth is the Lord's. We'll just stop right there for now. He's making a proclamation. And we are all pretty much church people. Maybe many of us have been saved, born again in Christ for a long time. Maybe some not so long. But we come to church every Sunday. You listen to Christian music. You listen to Christian talk. Maybe you watch Michael Youssef, Charles Stanley, David Jeremiah, all the good ones on TV. I won't mention the bad ones right now, but because I can't think of any. But there are plenty of them out there. But you watch YouTube, you watch pastors, preachers on YouTube, and we're all kind of comfortable. We have this Christian worldview, biblical worldview. And when I come up here, the pulpit, and preach to you the first 5 words of Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's, you say, okay, next. What's the next thing you're going to talk about? But I want to stop there for just a second, because that is quite a statement, and it's a serious proclamation that David was saying then, and I am saying now, and what we as a church say as Christians, because all of society now is proclaiming a very different message. They're saying the earth belongs to all of us. And it does in a sense. We're stewards of it. And the earth just is. It came out of a little pin-sized thing somewhere in the center of the universe that exploded, the Big Bang Theory, right? And now the earth was formed how many billions of years ago? I don't know. But I think they say now the earth is like 15 or 30 billion years old, according to the evolutionist, Big Bang people. And it's being taught in schools. Evolution is being taught in schools, and many of us may even here sort of deep down believe in that. I don't think it's a damning thing to believe in that, but you can't take it too far before you start falling off the edge of good doctrine. I do know people who I love and respect who lean towards evolution, even in Christianity. But I'm not going to get too much into that. But when David says that, the earth is the Lord's, that is something that we have to continue to proclaim. And I believe in this church, we will continue to proclaim that. And it might eventually, maybe not this week, this year, but it might be eventually become somewhat unusual in our world. But the words that God inspired David to write is our truth. They are truth, and they must be continually proclaimed generation by generation. I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that me as a preacher, the preachers, but also you as the preachers who go out, because you all sort of preach the gospel through your lives, we have to get this right. We have to preach these words that the earth is the Lord's. Amen. And that starts it. But then look what David says in the next few words. And the fullness thereof. And I've read this psalm, I don't know how many times, but I've never really spent some time with it. I've never sat down with it in like two easy chairs and asked questions of it and dwelt on it and read what other people have said about it. But when we look at those words, and the fullness thereof, what does that mean? I mean, the earth is the Lord's. Isn't that enough? But then there's a fullness thereof. And I'm thinking that the earth is the Lord's, so all that is seen is the Lord's. But it's also all that has been, all the treasures of gold and diamonds yet to be mined are his. All the power which spins the earth on its axis, the power which flings it around the sun consistently, all that is his. All the knowledge of mankind is the Lord's, both past, present, and into the future. All the future knowledge, all the inventions yet to come about belong to the Lord. Some of you may have worked at companies that I did. I supported the people who this applies to. I certainly wasn't one of them. But if they came up with an invention, that invention belonged to the company. And they were sort of inventors. They were designing the weapon systems for the future for the Department of Defense. And if they came up with a science or technology or an idea, that belonged to the MITRE Corporation. They owned it. So everything, if the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, then he owns everything. The deepest love that two people can share belongs to the Lord. The secret thoughts that we all have that are deep in our hearts belong to the Lord. The tears we shed in private belong to the Lord. You know that Psalm 56:8. He collects them in his bottle. Not one of them is, I mixed up but he collects all our tears in a bottle. All the people, all the souls, past, present, and future, are the Lord. All of our worship throughout all of history, now and into all of the future, belongs to the Lord. So when we see the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, the world and all those who dwell therein is the Lord's. That's a huge statement. And I just don't, I try not to, when I read it by myself and I just, reading through the Bible, I know I would, and I have just kind of glossed over that. But we have to spend some time with it sometimes. And it continues on, for he has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers. So that's sort of the proclamation part. David is proclaiming, setting down the truth that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Now, if we believe that, and if we accept that, and if If that is true, then we have to ask ourselves, well, then where am I? Who am I? If the Lord is God, if he owns everything, then what's my place in all of this? And you see the world nowadays trying to figure that out. Not where's my place with God, but where's my place in the world? And I believe, and I heard this said by at another preacher's conference, that everybody has some sort of an understanding or knowledge that they have to get right with God. Even atheists, non-believers, people who hate God or want nothing to do with him, deep down, somewhere deep down, they have a need to be right with God, even though they don't understand it or know him. But we tend, after we see who God is and his ownership of everything, we have to ask, well, if I'm in his creation, then what's my role? Why am I here? And then we ask these questions, or questions in verse 3. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord, and who shall stand in his holy place? In other words, how can I have anything to do with this God? He made me, I am his, but I don't know how that relationship works out. So we ask the question, and this question is sort of evident of the fact that this is probably an account of when the ark was being brought up into Jerusalem. We looked at that story from 1 Samuel as well, maybe a year or more ago, where David recaptured, the ark was returned to the nation of Israel, and David was bringing it back from the Philistines back into Jerusalem after a short stay on the border. And now it's a glorious time. It's a wonderful celebratory time where he's bringing it back into the center of the city. And he says, who shall ascend the hill? Who is worthy to ascend into God's presence? And who shall stand in his holy place? Do we ask that question now? That's another thing that's kind of fallen off over the years. Maybe in our generation, certainly, nobody asks, how can I get right with God? Very, very few people ask that, even in churches. I got some a survey statistics to tell you about in a minute. But people do not ask, who shall stand in his holy presence, or how can I stand in his holy presence? What questions do people ask nowadays? How can I get my way? How can I get more? How can I get my voice heard? How can I get more followers on my social media? How can I get more likes on my YouTube broadcast? If only my life was accepted, and if only if only people like me, how can I get more people to like me? That's what people are asking now. How many people are asking, how many people come up to you? And I'll ask this for across your whole life, in the past up until now. How many people have come up to you and say, how can I get right with the Lord? I mean, I'm a pastor, and people know that. My whole boxing class, they call me preacher. And I was in the Rotary Club. Everybody knew I was a pastor. I had a part-time job. I had my full-time job when I was working full-time. Everybody knew. Nobody asked me, how can I get right with the Lord? I could shove it down their throats, but if they're not interested. And we talk about some spiritual things, but nobody asks this question anymore. Because very few people in the world have a biblical worldview, have a God-centered worldview, which is very important. We, as the Church of Christ, who have been called out by God to be the people of God, we must have, and hopefully do have, a biblical worldview. I read a survey in some Christian publication. It was a survey, a poll was done by the Arizona Christian University. Is any of you seen that? And it's like Christianity Today or something like that. And it said only 37% of Christian pastors have a biblical worldview. That should scare us to death. Not in the big overall scheme, because the Lord has everything under control, but 37% of Christian pastors overall have a biblical worldview. And it gets worse. 41% of senior pastors do. 28% of associate pastors do. Now, we're fortunate here that both John and I keep pointing as if he's there, both John and I have a biblical worldview. But 28% generally of associate pastors do not. 13% of teaching pastors do not. So if I was like a pastor of Christian education, I taught Sunday school Bible studies, only 13% of teaching pastors have a biblical worldview. Get this, 12% of children and youth pastors have a biblical worldview. 12%. 12 out of 100. One something out of 10. And 4% of executive pastors. I don't know what that is. I think a big church, a pastor oversees everything, maybe a preaching pastor, but an executive pastor takes care of all the business of the church. 4% of them have a biblical worldview. And these are the people who are kind of called to bring about spiritual formation in people. So if I didn't have a biblical worldview, I wouldn't be teaching much from the Bible. You wouldn't be getting any biblical teaching. You go out and you start listening to the wrong people. You start telling other people the wrong non-biblical things, and then see how it spreads. And then, society is doomed. We need more churches. We need more people with that biblical worldview who are seeing the Lord as the owner and of the earth and the fullness thereof, who created it and founded it. And then we ask the questions, how can I stand before this great and awesome God? But we're not asking those questions. And then we see the answer in verse 4. He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to what is false and does not swear deceitfully. So those are the prerequisites to stand in his holy place. Now, if we look at just those, 4 things? Clean hands, pure heart, not lift up his soul to what is false, and not sworn deceitfully. If we base all of if we examine ourselves, guaranteed we're going to fall on at least one, if not all 4 of those. Now, do you see, I said it earlier, how in this Psalm 24, we see God, the nature of God, we see the nature of ourselves, because we look at these things and we say, I'm doomed. I'm helpless. There's no way I can stand in the presence of the Lord. And it thrusts us to Jesus, doesn't it? It says, I can't do it. But then we see a little hint in verse 5 of Jesus. The person who can do that, he will receive blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. And isn't that kind of almost not description, but some evidence of who Christ is? Blessing from the Lord, righteousness. The righteousness of God is given to us through Jesus Christ. We cover ourselves in his righteousness. So we see our need for Christ in this passage. We see what Christ does for us in this passage. So we see who God is. We look at that and we see how can we have a relationship with him, stand in his presence. We see the prerequisites, which are far beyond our ability to meet. And then we see our need to sort of help make us right, that we can meet that Because in Christ, because he has clean hands, he has a very perfectly pure heart, he has not lifted up his soul to what is false, he has not sworn deceitfully. When we enter into him, when we hide ourselves in him, that is applied to us. He is our clean hands, our pure heart, our right soul, and our proper, are not swearing deceitfully. He is that answer to that for all of us. Such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. I don't have too much to say on that verse. It just kind of sums up, such is the generation. For those of us, we are the generation now, as a part of the church of Jesus Christ, who have a biblical worldview, who realize our inability and our lack of qualifications to come to the Lord, and we find that help in the Lord. We are that generation who seek the face of God of Jacob. And that Selah, the Selah there and at the end of verse 10, it's, what it is. It's sort of a pause for contemplation. So as they were singing this, and they were probably singing it on the way up the ascent, the steep ascent to Jerusalem, to the walled city of Jerusalem, they were singing this. They would sing that part, and they would say, such is the generation of those who seek him, who seek the face of the God of Jacob. And then there would be a pause, and let it sink in. I don't do it too often. I'm not a great orator, but a good orator will say something, will say a catchy, pithy phrase like I have written here that I meant to refer to, and I'll say, the character of God determines the character of his worshipers. And then he'll pause. Maybe you say it again. The character of God determines the character of his worshipers. And a good orator will let that sink in just a few seconds. Not a minute, but just a few seconds. And that's what that Selah is. They say something, and it lets it sink in. And then they resume. And so now we come to verses 7 through 10. The presentation. Now, again, could you picture in your mind's eye this group of people surrounding the ark? You have the priests in their white robes, maybe the trumpets, the shofars, the trumpets blowing or whatever, and people celebrating and singing. King David leading the contingent up the hill. The Ark of the Covenant being carried by the I can't remember the name of the people who were allowed to carry it, but who are carrying it up, and they're going up the ascent, and they come up finally to the walled city of Jerusalem. The gates are shut. The doors or the gates, I don't know what they were, maybe both, they were shut. And from what the commentators say, and you can kind of see it in your mind's eye, somebody would bang on the door. Lift up your heads, O gates, be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. And then you hear faintly from inside the thick wooden or iron or whatever kind of doors and gates they had, who is this King of glory? And then the answer would come, the Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord, mighty in battle. And he'd say it again, lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. And again, the voice, who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. And then it doesn't say it here, but then you see the gates opening up, and the ark, the kind of at the time understood to have the presence of God, the ark would come in. Notice the difference, a little bit of difference there. Who is this King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord, mighty in battle. So prior to entering the city, the Lord has fought the battle. He is our champion. He is our commander-in-chief. He is the commander of the army, the church militant, the army who's fighting through this life, right? And he comes in. He comes into the city. Then look at the next way it says, who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. It's almost like the battle is over. Christ has come in. Now there's some ways that we can apply this to our Christian experience. One is, we're the city. We are the walled, each one of us individually is a walled city. We choose to let in what we choose to let in. And we keep out what we believe is right to keep out. And at some point in our lives, for those of us who are believers, it happened. For those who may be listening either here or online who are not yet believers or think they may be believers, they may not yet have opened their gates to let the Lord in. Not the Lord himself, but you could say that. Lord is pounding. Open lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Now, what a lot of people in the world, a lot of people in the church of Jesus Christ who call themselves Christians say, they don't say, who is this King of glory? They say, no, thank you. You set up your camp outside this gate. When I need you, I'll come and get you. Or I will come to you. Don't try to push your doctrine on me. I will come to you. I like my city the way it is, my walled city. Don't disturb me. That's what a lot of people are saying. But I challenge you that we all have to open that gate and let the Lord in, because that is the time when the battle ceases, so to speak. When the Lord comes in, the battle against sin, yes, we fight sin on a type of level now, but the victory is won when Christ comes in to our lives. So have you done that? Have you lifted up your gate and lifted up your ancient doors and let the King of glory in? The King of glory that David talked about was the God that sort of was found in the Ark of the Covenant, but now we have Jesus Christ, and we all know the verse. If anyone knocks, I knock. If open the door and let me in. I'm not going to try to remember where that is, but I think it's in Revelation 3. What is it? Revelation. I'm not going to go there now, but it's in Revelation 3 and 5, I think. And he may be knocking. He may be knocking now. And you have to do that. If you don't, the battle is going to continue and the doors are going to shut and they won't be opened again. And you will have lost the opportunity. So do it now. Open your gates around your soul, around your spirit, and let the Lord in. Let him take over. Let him come in and dwell with you and stay with you. And the battle will be over. So this was all written by David, again, not a king of the largest, most great kingdom. I mean, I remember one of my favorite chapters, again, is Deuteronomy 7. It says, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It was not because you were more in number than any of the people the Lord set his love on you and chose you, for you were the fewest of all people. But it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers." So David isn't famous because he was a king of the greatest kingdom empire ever to exist on earth. It was not really a noteworthy kingdom. But David knew God, and God knew him. That is what made David great. And I think often, I'm not the pastor of a the greatest church, well, the biggest church. I think it is one of the greatest churches around, but I'm not the pastor of the biggest church. I don't have huge influence over all people all over the world and all over the country. But if God called me, and if I know God, and if God called you to something, and God knows you, and you know God, a book of the Bible or a psalm could be written about us. It's faithfulness. It's not the length of our reach to influence people. It's our faithfulness. Any one of you could be a character in the Bible if you trust in the Lord, if you follow him, if you open your gates and your doors to him. You're just as precious as the biggest names in all of, Christianity. So Jesus is knocking. You ask, who's out there? And he says, the Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. You darn well better open that door, because the knock may not come again. Let me say a prayer, and then we are going to participate in the Lord's table, and then we will be done. Let's pray.